Every year, 12 million girls are married before they reach the age of 18. A practice the UN has said will take 300 years to eradicate. Now, three of the world's most high-profile humanitarians have vowed to tackle the issue together. But is this an impossible task? I've come to join Michelle Obama, Amal Clooney, and Melinda French Gates on their first field visit together to Malawi, a country where 42% of girls marry under the age of 18, to ask them how bad the issue is and if it can be turned around in a generation. Michelle Obama, thank you so much for speaking to us at BBC 100 Women.
Thank you for being here. It's my pleasure.
So we're here to talk about the work you're doing to end child marriage, along with Amal Clooney and Melinda French Gates. Why is that an issue that's important to you personally?
I've said this time and time again. I see myself in the girls that we're fighting for. I see my daughters in those girls. If we just put ourselves in those girls' shoes and think of how would we feel if it were us or our daughters that were married off at the age of 12 or 10 or however old, and their dreams, their opportunities and aspirations were cut off completely, married to an older man, forced to start having children way before their time. Any of us would be outraged at the thought. And if it were our children or grandchildren, we would move heaven and earth to make sure that that didn't happen. We would make sure we were protecting our daughters and our granddaughters. And I can't not feel that for every girl around the world.
I remember I met some young girls in Ethiopia a number of years ago, and they were between ages 9 and 11. I mean, you look at a 9-year-old, that's a child. We think of a 15-year-old still, and she is a young adolescent, but a 9 or 11-year-old is a child. And they told their stories of how, they would go out to fetch water and they'd come home and there was this arranged marriage. They'd try to run away and they couldn't.
We don't have an international system that can prevent this type of behavior against women and against girls. Then at least we should try and punish it when it happens, and through punishment, try to deter it. But the large-scale international organizations that we have that are supposed to be dealing with this, like the UN Security Council, like powerful governments, are not delivering. And so I think philanthropy then and individual lawyers can play and have to play a larger role.
Because how urgent an issue would you call this? Because the UN has said this will take 300 years to end. It's a scary figure.
The 300 years is not a tolerable time frame. This is an urgent issue. The health of women and girls on this planet measures the health of our planet. Women and girls are at the core of everything that happens to us, and we can do better. This is an issue that can be solved tomorrow if all the world leaders got together and made it a priority. It wouldn't take 300 years. It could happen in less than a generation.
It's about unshackling half the population in every country. So if you want to make progress in human rights, you have to start with the rights of girls. And child marriage in particular is the root cause of so many of the biggest problems that we see, because if a girl is married off at 12 or 13, and we met many of them who have been, she's more likely not to graduate from high school. She's more likely not to, get a job and be economically independent. She's more likely to suffer violence, and she's more likely to have health issues, including unsafe pregnancies. So if you are able to tackle that, you're also going to have a knock-on effect in all of these other areas.
As part of their visit, the trio have attended a school in central Malawi, in a district where a third of girls fall pregnant under 18. They're collaborating to fund local projects with the aim of keeping more girls in school.
When I was your age, there were people in my community that didn't think a girl like me, who didn't have money or wealth or connections, could do the things that I did. I even had my second form teacher tell me that I shouldn't apply to the colleges I applied to because she didn't think I could get in. So I ignored her and I applied to Princeton. I got in and I went to law school and became a lawyer. And I've worked at a university, I've run an NPO, I've done all sorts of things. So I know that there are so many girls like all of us all over the world where people are underestimating them. They're telling us what we can't do. And I refuse to let any more girls feel that they're not worthy of the investment because I know what's inside it. So
one of the things that you've done as part of your work and advocacy is visit Malawi, and you were in a district that has very high rates of child marriage, and you went to a school there and you met young girls there. What surprised you most about that visit?
Well, I can't say at this stage that I'm surprised because I've traveled around the world and I've seen girls like these everywhere. But what brings me the most joy, inspires me, gives me optimism, is the light that's still in their eyes, the smiles on their face, the hunger that they have to make their lives better. You would think that you'd walk into a school like that and there would be a lull, a dullness, a depression. There are a lot of people who might assume a lot of negative things about schools like the Letzi School. But you walk into those schools and you see power, you see intellect, you see ambition. So it shouldn't be surprising. It isn't for me, but that's why it's important for us to go to those schools.
You are lucky enough to be invited into a lot of important rooms. You get to meet lawmakers and prime ministers and presidents. And could you share with us the kind of conversations you have when you are advocating for the rights of girls?
Well, when I'm advocating to prime ministers or presidents, it's about helping them understand why investing in their girls is actually investing in their own economy. That literally by investing in a girl, she will go on to be a healthy woman, she'll raise healthy children, they get educated, and they create economic opportunity. They are adding to the economy. I absolutely, if I go into a president or prime minister's office and he has daughters, believe me, I talk about his daughters, and quite often they're educating their own daughters. But then you have to get them to think, well, what would be the barriers if you did this other thing, or it was looked at in this way? So you have to make the humanitarian argument, but often to really get them to act, it is the numbers that move them, and that's just the truth. And so I'll make either argument or both. Whichever one's going to move the dial, that's the one I'm going to make. Until you can make the case, have the numbers, and actually show the data of how much their economy will increase, unless you can make the case with data, you don't have a good argument in these situations. So we have learned to collect the data in many places, and it shows us and the advocates how and where to work too, because you might have it in parts of the country but not in others. So the data here is really important.
Is this a problem that can be solved? Is this an unsolvable problem that we're facing?
I don't think it's unsolvable, but yes, I mean, it's 12 million a year. It's over 120 million child brides in sub-Saharan Africa alone. In countries like Bangladesh, it's more than 50% of girls that are getting married off before they're 18. So the stunting, in the growth of each of these societies is just shocking. But you either sort of bury your head in the sand, or you think, okay, here's the piece that I can tackle. And I think, using messaging to bring people on board is important. So, maybe someone's not going to empathize with the plight of a girl in Malawi, but if you show them that solving child marriage is going to have, a really positive impact on the economy, then maybe that will be the thing.
There are several states in the US that don't have a minimum age of getting married. This is not
and
just...
that would be a surprise to a lot of people. No, this is a global issue. And, no, there are not, dowries in the United States, but, taking advantage of young girls can look like many things. It can take on many different forms. We tend to think that poverty and and people who are disadvantaged, it looks like it has a certain look. It's a corrugated roof. It's a mud hut. It's a place without running water or sewage. But abuse and neglect and underinvestment can happen in some of the shiniest cities in the world.
Almost everyone we speak to says that poverty is the number one issue for child marriage. It's to make sure that their daughters can eat, have a life. But an issue as big as poverty doesn't feel like it's an issue that we can solve. Is this an unsolvable problem? Is this too big for us to tackle?
This is a solvable problem. The rates are coming down when real work gets done. It's really a social norm problem. It's that, first of all, if you're a family that's in poverty, and so let's say you are scraping by and you don't have food in the house, why do they think about selling the girl child? Why aren't they thinking about selling the boy? Why is it acceptable to sell your daughter for $15 and it's not acceptable to sell your son? Are you really looking for a better life for her, or are you looking for a better life for your family? And quite often when you really spend time with these families, they're trying to feed the other children in the family, but they're valuing their sons, is the truth, more than their daughters. The only way to change social norms is at the community level. You get the community thinking differently about the girls. When you get enough villages standing up and saying no, then you start to bring the rates down. And that kind of social change takes educating everybody, figuring out who the leaders can be that can stand up, but it takes a family and a community to stand up.
Our foundation, we wage justice, and we say it's waging because you actually can't just assume it's going to happen. You have to sort of form alliances and really sort of fight against these kinds of injustices with the determination that it takes to win a war. And one of the things that we see in Malawi is it's not so much about changing the law on paper, because actually Malawi's laws are fairly progressive when it comes to girls' rights. But it's about access to justice, where, what's the point of having a beautiful constitution that protects, girls from child marriage if the girls who are the victims of this don't know about it? So we formed a network of mobile legal aid clinics, which means literally there's a van that goes out with lawyers, and we go out in a community and say to girls, these are your rights, and if you need a lawyer for free to protect you, that's what we are here to provide.
It's illegal to marry under the age of 18 in Malawi. But since the law was introduced 6 years ago, there have been very few prosecutions.
This is actually the first time we've been able to reach this part of Malawi. We are focusing on child marriage because we know this is a big problem in this part of Malawi.
Outreach is one practical solution. Her foundation funds female lawyers across the continent, including the Women Lawyers Association of Malawi.
We're going to try and meet with as many people as we can this afternoon, including in private sessions. But you can also call the Women Lawyers Association of Malawi anytime by just dialing 3081.
And it was extraordinary. We were in an area that we'd never been able to reach before in Malawi. This was the first legal clinic dealing with child marriage. We didn't really know if anybody was going to show up, and 1,200 people did. And we had so many follow-on consultations during the course of the afternoon where girls said, I'm 14, I have a child, what can I do? And lawyers are taking down their case
Because that's the
case
issue,
details.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the law's there, but
Yeah.
there's still such a high rate of child marriage. And,
Exactly.
And the marriage happens in an informal setting with a
Yeah.
tribal chief and a parent selling
Exactly. So,
the
I mean,
child.
I think the law is a part of the solution. So the first thing was for Malawi to change its law so it did say the right thing on paper, which they did, and the rate has gone down since then, but not enough. So, giving people access to the courts, and this is what we do, is fight for girls' rights in the courtroom. That's going to be a big piece, but we're also not naive enough to think that that's the only piece. We have to form alliances. So at this clinic in Malawi, we also had tribal leaders there. They helped us to convene people, and they're going to be helpful as part of the solution. We've had many chiefs, female chiefs, actually over 100 of them got together in Malawi and said, we will annul any traditional marriage that has taken place with a child. And there's one in particular called Chief Kachinda Moto, who has annulled so many child marriages that they call her the Terminator.
There is a lot that follows you when you come, and then there's a lot of attention that goes and shines a light on the girls. And then when you leave, it's almost like the light can kind of leave that environment. And do you think about, because these are communities that have been badly let down as well, do you wonder what effect it is to?
I think about that. I think about that every day. And one of the ways that I can personally control that is to make sure that those kind of interactions aren't a one and done kind of thing. I learned that on the very first solo trip that I took as First Lady. I went to the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson School in Islington in London. And I think my husband was there for a G Summit. I don't know. It all gets blurry, but I said, I want to be out in the community. I just don't want to sit in the hotel and with the rest of the White House press. I want to go out and I want to see what's happening. So I spent a day in this amazing school that was comprised of mostly immigrant girls. And I spent the day, and at the time, what I'm traveling around with is nothing compared to what was traveling around with me when I was First Lady. I had a brilliant day with these amazing young girls, and I felt what you felt. It's like we turned the school upside down, and it was a powerful day, but that's not enough. We have to stay connected to these girls, and so we did. We set up calls. We invited some of the girls to the White House. What I can do is make sure that it's not just a one-time thing, because I understand what you understand, that these girls have been let down a lot, and I don't want to be another letdown for them. Like, I can't fix their problems, but I can be the person that comes back again and again and again, in big ways and in small ways. So that's something I think about every time I interact with a child on a big way. It can't just be a one-time opportunity. We can't be just another disappointment.
And another thing that you did when you were in Malawi was you went to a school.
Yes.
And you gave a speech on stage when you were at school. And you said a couple of things that stuck with me. One of them was you said, the lesson that I had was that I went to school, I went to university, I got a career, and then I got married later in life. And could you speak to how the girls reacted?
I think, the message was you should have the choice. And I said, you should decide whether to have a family, when to have a family, who you want to marry, whether what kind of work you want to do. And they were very ambitious, and I was really impressed with them. So they might not want to wait till their late 30s, but hopefully they'll have more freedom than they have now.
We've had a decade of talking about the girl boss, the singular woman who knocks down barriers, but not really sort of women working together. Do you think this new decade is more about us sharing our resources as women and creating a new momentum?
Women, I think, actually naturally work in collectives. I see it over and over again, and it's interesting. I've talked to a number of women who are older than me, who maybe they made it as CEO or they made it to CFO in their company. And there's some regret that they didn't do it in concert with other women. They didn't pull other women up and along with them. And I see the generation that at least I've been part of, and Michelle and I are essentially the same age, we've always wanted to pull everybody along with us. So I kind of think it's the myth, it's an easy myth that people like to have of, the singular girl boss. There is nothing we don't do in teams. Like, I studied computer science in college. It's a myth to think it's one white guy coding. I was in computer science. We all worked in teams. It's teams that create new things, right? If we can come together as a threesome, we're going to get, instead of 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, we're going to get 1 + 1 + 1 has this multiplier effect of 6, 7, 8, 9, because we're working in collective, doing the same strands of work, but also putting them together. Yes, we can use our platform, we can get people to see the issue, but it really comes down to these grassroots organizations, the ones you saw in Malawi, doing the work on the ground, us advocating for the change, bringing funding, getting others to fund this work, and then working the legal system to make sure there are more lawyers who actually get all the way up into court and get the perpetrators in jail, right? And then we need safe places for those girls when they come out of a marriage to be and to have economic opportunity. But it can happen.
You know, when I meet these young lawyers, like the ones we work with across the continent, when I teach at Columbia Law School, when I talk to my students, I see a generation very determined to be, much better than we have been on the advocacy, whether it's on climate change or human rights issues, and they care about issues like this, and they will be agents of change. I didn't know, the things that they already know. I wasn't, politically savvy or active or engaged really until I was sort of well into my 20s, I would say. And these guys are young and they're informed, and, that gives me hope that we can also accelerate the pace of change.
There are going to be a lot of people listening to this and watching this and reading this saying, this is not my problem. Child marriage has nothing to do with me. It's not in my community. I can't see this. I don't need to engage with this. What would you like to say to those people?
Disinvestment in women and girls is all of our issue, and it impacts us. In the United States, we're dealing with a rollback in reproductive rights, things that people thought they could take for granted, things that my girls thought that they could take for granted, that they would have the choice over their own reproductive health. That has been rolled back. And a lot of it is because of the devaluation of women, the belief that women don't have choice and power over their own being. That's what's happening here. When a 10-year-old is sold off to an older man because her family is poor, it's the same mentality, it's the same carelessness, the same selfishness, the same greed and thoughtlessness that exists everywhere. So you can't just turn a blind eye to it because it's not happening in your own backyard, because eventually that kind of attitude, it has a way of slipping and growing and feeding into all aspects of how we live as a as a human species. It affects our humanity. So we all have to care. That's what I would say.